Commander Thack stared at the glowing screen in front of him, his four eyes scanning the data with the intensity of a predator sizing a prey. The information fascinated him. These creatures called humans came from a world so dangerous that the Galactic Council had labeled it Class XI Deathworld. Only 12 such planets existed in known space, and most were considered uninhabitable even by the toughest species. His scarred mandibles clicked together, a sound that made his crew nervous. Thack had earned those scars in 100 battles across 50 star systems. The Rillan War fleet was feared throughout the galaxy, and he was their most ruthless commander. No species had ever stood against him for long. "Tell me about their planet again," he commanded his science officer. The smaller Rillan cowered slightly. "Commander, their homeworld experiences temperature swings of over 60 degrees. They have massive storms that can destroy entire cities. Wild animals that hunt in packs and can kill with poison or crushing force. The very air they breathe would burn our lungs." Thack's eyes gleamed. "And yet they survived to build starships." "Yes, sir. Our scouts report they've been spacefaring for less than 200 years, but their technology is impressive." The commander leaned back in his command chair. Any species tough enough to evolve on such a nightmare world would make excellent soldiers for the Empire. The Rillans had conquered dozens of civilizations, but they always needed more warriors for their endless campaigns. "Bring us alongside their colony vessel," he ordered his lieutenant. "These humans will either serve the Empire or be eliminated. There is no third option." The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency. Through the massive view screen, the human ship grew larger as they approached. Thack had expected something crude and primitive, but what he saw made him pause. The vessel was enormous, easily 3 times the size of his own battle cruiser. Its hull was sleek and elegant, covered in solar collectors that gleamed like scales. Strange markings ran along its sides, symbols he didn't recognize. "They're hailing us, Commander," reported his communications officer. "Put them on screen." The view screen flickered, and suddenly Thack was looking at his first human. The creature was smaller than a Rillan, with pale skin marked by lines and creases. Its hair was silver gray, and its eyes were a startling blue color. Most surprising of all, the human was smiling. "Welcome to the sector," the human said, his voice calm and friendly. "I'm Captain Tom Harrison of the colony ship New Horizon. We're honored by your visit." Thack studied the human's face, looking for signs of fear or deception. He found neither. This Captain Harrison seemed genuinely pleased to meet them, despite the fact that a Rillan War vessel could reduce his ship to debris in minutes. "I am Commander Thack of the Rillan Imperial Fleet. We have come to evaluate your species." Harrison nodded, as if this was perfectly normal. "Of course. We'd be happy to show you around our ship. As it happens, we're holding our evening memorial service in a few hours. Would you and your officers care to join us?" The bridge fell silent. Thack's warriors exchanged meaningful glances. A death ceremony? This was unexpected but promising. Most civilized species try to hide their military traditions from potential conquerors. If these humans were willing to show off their warrior rituals, it suggested they had confidence in their strength. "What sort of memorial?" Thack asked, his interest growing. "We honor those we've lost," Harrison explained. "It's an old tradition from Earth. We gather together, share stories, and remember the ones who came before us." Thack's mandibles clicked again, but this time with approval. Honoring fallen warriors was something he could respect. Perhaps these Deathworlders understood the value of military tradition after all. "We accept your invitation," he growled, already planning how he would assess their combat capabilities. "I will bring my senior staff." "Wonderful," Harrison beamed. "We'll have quarters prepared for you. I think you'll find our ceremony very illuminating." The connection ended, and Thack turned to his officers. "Prepare a boarding party. Full ceremonial armor, but keep weapons ready. We're going to see what these humans consider worthy of remembrance." As his crew scrambled to prepare, Thack stared out at the human vessel. Something about Captain Harrison's smile nagged at him. The human had seemed almost eager to show them this memorial service. In Thack's experience, species only displayed such confidence when they had hidden strengths. He would find out soon enough what these Deathworlders were truly capable of. Lieutenant Vel's clawed feet clicked against a metal floor as he followed Commander Thack through the winding corridors of the human vessel. The walls were covered with the strangest collection of images he had ever seen. Unlike Rillan ships, which displayed battle honors and conquest records, these humans seemed to celebrate the most bizarre things. One picture showed a massive wall of water crashing into a city, with tiny human figures running for their lives. Another depicted a mountain exploding, shooting fire and ash into the sky, while humans evacuated in small vehicles. There were images of humans standing next to creatures that could easily tear them apart, humans climbing impossible ice-covered peaks, and humans sailing across violent oceans in fragile-looking boats. Fascinating artwork, Commander Thack commented to their guide, a human female with short brown hair and laugh lines around her eyes. "Oh, these aren't art," Kate replied cheerfully. "These are historical photos from Earth. That one, there shows the Brisbane floods of 2022. Terrible tragedy. Lost my brother Danny in that one, along with about 300 others." Vel's battle-scarred hide prickled with unease. The human spoke of death and destruction as casually as a Rillan might discuss the weather. Her voice carried no fear, no reverence for the disaster that had killed her sibling. And that one, Thack pointed to the exploding mountain, Mount Vesuvius eruption of 2024. My great-grandfather, Jake, was one of the photographers who documented the evacuation. Crazy old man stayed until the very last transport ship. Got some incredible shots, though. Kate paused in front of the image, smiling fondly. He always said someone needed to record history, even the ugly parts. Vel exchanged a worried glance with another Rillan officer. In their culture, mentioning the dead was considered bad luck, especially those who died in disasters or defeats. Yet this human spoke of her deceased relatives with obvious affection and pride. They passed more images. Humans rescuing others from burning buildings. Humans digging survivors out of collapsed structures after earthquakes. Humans forming chains to pull people from flooding rivers. In every picture, the humans looked determined rather than afraid, working together instead of saving only themselves. Your species seems to document tragedy quite thoroughly, Vel observed. Kate turned to look at him, her expression thoughtful. We document everything, Lieutenant, the good times and the bad. My grandmother used to say that forgetting the hard times dishonors those who lived through them. The corridor opened into a vast assembly hall, and Vel stopped short at what he saw. Hundreds of humans were gathering, but not in the organized military formations he expected. Instead, they sat in loose circles, with the oldest and youngest mixed together randomly. There was no hierarchy visible, no separation between what looked like warriors and civilians. Children sat next to scarred veterans. Elderly humans chatted quietly with young adults. Some wore clothes that suggested technical occupations. Others looked like they worked with their hands, and a few had the bearing of soldiers. But all sat as equals, their voices creating a low murmur conversation that felt almost sacred. At the center of the largest circle, humans were carefully placing small objects and images. Vel could see photographs, small trinkets, pieces of jewelry, and items he couldn't identify. Everything was handled with extreme care, as if each object was precious beyond measure. What weapons would be displayed? Commander Thack asked, his voice carrying the expectation of seeing impressive armaments. Kate turned to him with a confused expression. Weapons? She seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. Oh no, Commander. These are memories. Vel felt his stomach tighten with anxiety. Memories? What kind of warrior culture built ceremonies around memories instead of strength? In Rillan tradition, memorial services showcased the weapons of fallen heroes, their battle honors, and their conquest records. Physical proof of their power and victory. I don't understand, Thack said, echoing Vel's thoughts. Kate's expression softened. Each person brings something that reminds them of someone they've lost. A photo, a favorite book, a tool they use, something that keeps their memory alive. We share stories about them. Remember what made them special. An elderly human man approached them, carrying a small wooden box. This belonged to my son Robert, he said to Kate. His carpenter tools. He used these to rebuild homes after the Chicago tornado of 2023. Kate nodded respectfully. Robert saved a lot of families with those hands of his. The man's eyes filled with water, but he was smiling. 47 houses he rebuilt that year, never charged of families who lost everything. Vel watched in horror as the old human's tears began flowing freely, yet no one seemed embarrassed or tried to stop him. Other humans nearby reached out to touch his shoulders, offering comfort without words. This was completely wrong by Rillan standards. Warriors didn't cry. The strong didn't show weakness. The living didn't dwell on the dead. Yet something about the scene made Vel's chest feel tight with an emotion he couldn't name. The massive hall fell into complete silence, a quiet so deep that Lieutenant Vel could hear his own breathing echoing inside his helmet. Hundreds of humans sat in their circles, heads bowed, some holding small objects against their chests. Commander Thack shifted beside him, clearly expecting some kind of battle cry or display of military might to begin the ceremony. Instead, the silence stretched on. Vel counted nearly 2 full minutes before the first human slowly rose to his feet. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of scars on his hands that spoke of hard physical work. His hair was graying at the temples, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the hall without strain. "This is for Jake Morrison," he said, holding up a faded photograph that showed 2 men in heavy winter gear standing in front of an ice-covered landscape. Lost him in the Antarctic rescue mission 3 years ago. The research station got hit by a blizzard that came out of nowhere. Winds over 200 miles per hour. Temperature dropped to -80. The man paused, looking down at the photograph with obvious pain. Jake was the helicopter pilot. Could have evacuated himself and the crew first, like protocol demanded. But he saw those 17 researchers trapped in the collapsed building. He made 6 trips in that storm. 6 times he flew into winds that should have torn his aircraft apart. Vel's mandibles clicked nervously. In Rillan culture, mentioning the dead was considered the worst possible luck. Only weakness and failure spoke of those who hadn't survived. Yet this human was speaking as if the death was something to be honored. He got them all out. The man continued, his voice cracking slightly. All 17. But on the last trip, a wind shear caught his helicopter. Jake went down just 2 miles from safety. Commander Thack stiffened beside Vel, his entire body radiating discomfort. The Rillan military code was clear. The dead were forgotten. Only the living mattered, and survival was the only measure of worth. The tall human carefully placed Jake's photograph in the center of the circle, then sat back down. Another person immediately stood up, this time an elderly woman with silver hair and gentle eyes. "Lucy Martinez," she said, tears already flowing freely down her weathered cheeks. "My daughter, cancer took her when she was just 31 years old." Vel watched in growing horror as the old woman's tears continued to fall, yet no one seemed embarrassed or tried to make her stop. In Rillan society, such a display of emotion would result in immediate exile from the community. "Lucy knew she was dying," the woman continued, her voice steady despite her tears. "The doctors gave her 6 months. But instead of spending that time feeling sorry for herself, she volunteered at the children's hospital. Every single day, even when the chemotherapy made her so weak she could barely stand." The woman held up a small stuffed animal, a worn teddy bear with one eye missing. The kids in the cancer ward gave her this on her last day. They called her their guardian angel. She read them stories, played games with them, helped them forget their fear for a little while. More humans began to stand. A middle-aged man spoke about his father, a firefighter who died saving a family from a burning apartment building. A young woman talked about her best friend, a paramedic who was killed in a car accident while rushing to help victims of a multi-vehicle crash. An elderly man shared memories of his wife, a teacher who spent her final years working with homeless children. Each story was different, but they all had the same strange theme. These humans weren't honoring great warriors or successful conquerors. Instead, they were remembering people who had died helping others, often sacrificing themselves for complete strangers. Vel noticed something even more disturbing. As each person spoke, the humans around them began to weep openly. Tears flowed without shame or embarrassment. Strong-looking men cried like children. Women wailed with grief. Yet somehow, instead of weakening the group, each shared story seemed to bind them closer together. People reached across the circles to hold hands. They embraced strangers who were crying. They nodded with understanding when someone's voice broke with emotion. The entire hall was transforming into something Vel had never witnessed before, a community united by shared pain rather than divided by it. A young man stood up, holding a military uniform jacket. This belonged to my unit commander, Captain Rodriguez. We lost him in the space station disaster 2 years ago. The life support systems failed, and there were only enough emergency pods for half the crew. The young man's hands shook as he spoke. The captain could have taken the first pod. His rank gave him that right. But he spent 40 minutes getting everyone else to safety first. By the time he tried to reach the last pod, the station's hull gave way. Vel's breathing became labored. These weren't stories of victory or strength. They were stories of people choosing to die so others could live. In Rillan culture, such behavior would be considered mental illness, a fundamental failure of survival instinct. Yet the humans listened to every word with reverence, their tears mixing with quiet smiles as they remembered acts of selfless courage. Lieutenant Vel's world turned upside down as he watched what should have been impossible. The humans he had identified as obvious warriors, men and women with scars, strong builds, and military bearing, were breaking down into sobbing messes right in front of him. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong, that any species showing such weakness deserved immediate conquest. A massive human male rose to his feet, his shoulders broad enough to rival a Rillan's, his arms covered in the kind of scars that spoke of serious combat experience. When he spoke, his voice was deep and commanding, exactly what Vel expected from a human military leader. "This is for my squad," the man said, holding up a twisted piece of metal. "We were working the deep mines on Kepler, 442b when the tunnel system collapsed. Toxic gas started leaking from the lower shafts." The man's voice began to crack, and Vel watched in fascination as this obvious warrior's composure started to crumble. The evacuation alarm gave us maybe 10 minutes before the whole section would be flooded with poison. There were 43 families working the lower levels. Mothers, fathers, kids who weren't supposed to be down there but came to help their parents. Tears started flowing down the big man's face, and Vel's training screamed at him to look away. In Rillan culture, watching a warrior cry was considered shameful for both the crier and the witness. My boys, my squad, we could have reached the surface in 5 minutes. We had the fastest route, the best equipment. We would have been safe. The human's voice broke completely, but we couldn't leave those families behind. Children seated nearby didn't laugh or point at the crying adult. Instead, they reached out to touch his arms and hands, offering comfort with gentle pats and whispered words Vel couldn't understand. The sight made his skin crawl with confusion. So we went back. Again and again. Tony carried out 3 kids at once, even though the weight nearly crushed his back. David went down to the deepest level where the gas was thickest, brought up a pregnant woman who couldn't climb the ladders. Rick stayed behind to guide the last group out, even when the supports were already failing. The warrior's massive frame shook with sobs now. They saved every single person. 43 families made it to the surface alive. But the tunnel gave way just as my squad was coming up. The gas cloud caught them before they could reach the escape pods. Vel expected the other humans to show disgust or embarrassment at this display. Instead, people all around the crying warrior began linking arms with him and each other. A woman on his left put her arm around his shoulders. A teenage boy on his right grasped his hand firmly. "Every one of them could have escaped," the big man whispered, his voice barely audible now. "Every one of them chose to go back. They kept going back until everyone was safe." More humans stood to share similar stories. A scarred woman talked about her fire rescue team, who died pulling survivors from a burning apartment complex. A grizzled older man spoke of his police partner, who threw himself in front of a gunman to protect a school full of children. A young soldier described his unit's medic, who ran into enemy fire 17 times to retrieve wounded comrades. What disturbed Vel most wasn't the crying itself, but what happened afterward. As each person broke down emotionally, The humans around them didn't withdraw or show disgust. Instead, they moved closer. They formed tight circles of support, holding each other up when grief threatened to knock them down. The emotional displays weren't isolating these humans from their community. They were bonding them together in ways Vel had never witnessed. People who had been strangers an hour ago were now embracing like family members, united by shared understanding of loss and sacrifice. Commander Thack stood frozen beside him, his mandibles clicking in rapid, nervous patterns. Vel could see his commander's entire world be cracking. Everything they had been taught about strength and weakness was being turned inside out. In Rillan military doctrine, emotional breakdown meant immediate removal from combat units. Soldiers who couldn't control their feelings were considered dangerous liabilities. The strong survived by abandoning the weak, by focusing only on personal victory and conquest. But these humans were demonstrating something that made no sense by those standards. Their greatest warriors seemed to be the ones who cared most deeply about others, who were willing to sacrifice everything for people they barely knew. Their tears weren't signs of weakness, but proof of connections that ran deeper than any military hierarchy Vel had ever witnessed. The ceremony continued, and with each story, the bonds between the humans grew stronger. They were forging themselves into something that transcended individual strength or survival. They were becoming a single, unified force powered not by conquest or dominance, but by love and shared sacrifice. Vel realized with growing terror that he was witnessing the birth of something far more dangerous than any weapon, a species that grew stronger through vulnerability, more united through loss, and more powerful through the very emotions that Rillans considered fatal weaknesses. The memorial service reached its peak as the last person sat down, carefully placing a small music box in the center of the circle. The silence that followed was different from the one that had started the ceremony. This wasn't empty quiet, but a fullness that seemed to pulse with shared understanding. Then something happened that made Lieutenant Vel's blood run cold. The humans began to smile through their tears. Not cruel smiles or bitter expressions, but genuine warmth that transformed their grief-stained faces into something almost radiant. An elderly man reached over to comfort a crying woman, and she laughed softly while wiping her eyes. A young soldier who had broken down completely while talking about his fallen friends was now chuckling as children climbed onto his lap to offer hugs. The massive warrior who had wept over his lost mining squad was arm in arm with strangers, sharing stories that brought both tears and laughter. "I don't understand," Vel whispered to Commander Thack. "They're happy?" Thack couldn't answer. His 4 eyes were fixed on the scene before them, watching as hundreds of humans began to embrace each other. Warriors hugged civilians. Elderly people wrapped their arms around young adults. Children ran between the circles, offering comfort to anyone who looked sad. The crying continued, but it was mixed with quiet laughter, gentle conversations, an overwhelming sense of connection that Vel had never witnessed before. These humans weren't just mourning their dead. They were celebrating them, honoring them, and somehow drawing strength from the very memories that had reduced them to tears. Kate, their guide, approached the group of Rillan observers. Her own eyes were red from crying, but her smile was genuine and warm. "Thank you for joining us," she said. "I hope this helped you understand who we are." "Ah, yes," Commander Thack managed, though his voice sounded strangled. As the ceremony officially ended, the humans didn't disperse like a broken army. Instead, they moved with renewed purpose, their unity now unshakable. People made plans to meet later, to share meals, to continue conversations started during the memorial. The bonds formed through shared grief were clearly permanent, creating networks of support that would last for years. The Rillan delegation returned to their shuttle in complete silence. The short journey back to their warship felt like it lasted hours. Vel kept replaying what he had witnessed, trying to make sense of it through his military training, but every analysis came up empty. Back aboard their battlecruiser, Commander Thack dismissed his officers and retreated to his private quarters. Vel and the other warriors stood in the corridor for a long moment, none of them speaking. Finally, they went to their own rooms, each lost in thoughts that challenged everything they had ever believed about strength and warfare. 3 hours passed in absolute quiet throughout the ship. The crew went about their duties mechanically, But the usual chatter and casual conversation had vanished. Everyone seemed to sense that something fundamental had changed, though most didn't understand what. It was Lieutenant Vel who finally broke the silence. He found Commander Thack in the observation deck, staring out at the human colony ship through the reinforced viewport. "Commander," Vel said carefully, "I need to understand something." Thack didn't turn around. "Speak. How do we fight an enemy that grows stronger from pain?" The question hung in the air between them. In all of Vel's military training, in all the conquest manuals and tactical guides he had studied, there was no answer to this problem. The Rillan Empire conquered through fear, ruled through displays of overwhelming strength, and maintained control by eliminating any sign of weakness. But these humans had shown them something that made no sense by those standards. They had taken their deepest wounds, their most painful losses, and transformed them into connections that bound them together more tightly than any military discipline. "In our culture," Thack said slowly, still staring at the human ship, "the strong survive by abandoning the weak. We forget our failures. We hide our pain. We show no mercy because we expect none in return." "Yes, sir. That's what makes us powerful." "I thought so, too." Thack's mandibles clicked softly. "But those humans, they do the opposite of everything we've been taught. They remember their losses. They share their pain. They sacrifice themselves for strangers. And somehow, this makes them stronger than us." Vel felt his worldview cracking like ice under pressure. "But that's impossible. Emotion is weakness. Caring for others is a liability. Sacrifice is just another word for failure. Look at them," Thack said, gesturing toward the human vessel. "Does that look like failure to you?" Through the viewport, they could see lights moving throughout the human ship. People were gathering in smaller groups, continuing the conversation started during the memorial. Children were playing in the corridors, while adults watched with protective eyes. The entire vessel hummed with life and purpose. "They're not just surviving," Thack continued. "They're thriving. Every loss makes them more determined. Every sacrifice creates bonds that can't be broken. Every tear shed together makes them more unified." The commander finally turned to face his lieutenant. "We can't fight them, Vel. Our entire military doctrine is based on breaking the enemy's will to resist. But these humans get stronger when they're hurt. They become more dangerous when they lose people they care about. So what do we do?" Thack was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "We pray to the void that they never decide we're their enemy." Within the hour, orders went out across the Rillan fleet. They would withdraw from human space immediately, with strict instructions never to engage the species in combat. The official report would list humans as unsuitable for conquest due to unpredictable tactical responses. But Thack knew the truth. They weren't retreating because humans were unpredictable. They were running because humans had revealed something that shattered the foundation of Rillan civilization. True strength wasn't found in hiding from pain, but in facing it together. As the fleet jumped to hyperspace, leaving the humans far behind, Vel realized they were carrying something more dangerous than any weapon back to the Empire. They were bringing home the knowledge that everything they believed about power and strength might be completely wrong.